Hello and welcome to the latest installment in our Future Travel Experience Innovation Hub video series. My name is Ryan G. I'm the Head of Strategy and Development at the FTE Innovation and Startup Hub, which is the world's first global air transport innovation network. And I'm joined today by Nate Carpenter, who is the Chief Software Architect at Securiport. Now, Securiport is a member of the FTE Innovation and Startup Hub. In fact, they became our very first enterprise partner back in August 2019, joining our portfolio of corporate partners, which includes a number of the world's biggest and most forward-thinking airlines and airports. So they are certainly in very good company. So hello, Nate. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Well, thank you, Ryan, for having me on here.
And Nate, to kick things off, perhaps you can give us a brief 30-second overview of Securiport for anyone who may not be too familiar with the company.
Sure, Ryan. So Securiport is an international border security firm. And our mission is that we give our client governments the modern tools that they need to manage their borders and also to use data from a variety of internal and external sources that they have to detect risks within the traveler population, whether that is security risks, terrorism, human trafficking, things along those lines, or in modern day health risks as well. And as best we can, we build our products to give the government the means to balance the traveler experience with that need for security and risk management.
Fantastic. Thank you, Nate. So clearly, biometric technology is very much at the heart of what you do at Securiport. And the COVID-19 pandemic and the increased focus on creating a seamless, touchless, and secure passenger experience has probably placed even more emphasis now on the future role of biometrics in the air transport industry. So how important a role do you think biometrics is going to play in this industry as we move forward?
Well, I think biometrics in every form will continue to be essential. They're the most reliable way to establish a link between the data you have and the information you're collecting with a living, breathing human being. So, and as we know, contact-based fingerprints are still a primary modality, and those will be around for a while. But I think going forward, what we're going to see is a rise in touchless technologies, and that's going to be face and iris, and primarily in the near term. And it's amazing how much that technology has advanced in the past few years, especially face-based technologies. One of the ones we're excited about as well is kind of the over-the-air fingerprint capture. That gives another way to do touchless identification. And what we're waiting for now is for that to achieve the accuracy levels and the usability levels that are necessary to meet the security use cases and to provide the best traveler experience. So given all of these things, there is a biometric solution to fit just about every need out there. And it will be really exciting to see where that goes in the next couple of years. So
from a moment a passenger books a trip, how exactly is Securiport using that data to deliver improvements across the board? Because is this just about improvements at the immigration checkpoint, or is this much more wide-reaching than that?
Well, I think it's more wide-reaching. In many cases, of course, and in fact, one of the primary cases, it's really about reducing the time in queue, right? The more information we can get in advance with the traveler, then the faster we can identify them, right? We can verify their identity at the immigration checkpoint. We can do those checks for adverse information, and we can get them on their way. That's the goal of this process at the end of the day. But we really also have to deliver improvements in security, and that also affects the traveler experience. So if we have this information when they book the trip, or as early as possible in the travel process, the government has the opportunity to detect a potential risk early in the process. And they can do any investigations and resolutions and mitigations they need to do before the traveler even arrives, before they even board potentially. And that is that's great for the traveler and great for the government. So the more we can do early, the better. So this data to us is really important in that entire queue, not just at the immigration point.
Great. So clearly there are some wide-reaching benefits here. And I have to raise this point because any debate about the use of biometrics inevitably raises questions around data protection and personal privacy. So I'd like to address that relatively early on in our interview today. So where do you sit in this debate, Nate? Is there a middle ground that can keep everybody happy? And also, what steps need to be taken, do you think, to ensure that passengers are really fully aware of how their data is going to be used?
Sure. And as a provider of services, we are driven by our government clients' policies. So we provide the tools for them to land anywhere on that spectrum that they want to. Our default position, and actually that of our client governments, tends to be strongly toward the privacy and data protection side. So given this constant push-pull, and it's going to be, I think, constant as people become more aware of privacy needs, there is a middle ground. It's not going to make everybody happy, but I think we can find a place where everybody is at least content. They're willing to compromise in order to travel, and I think that's important. So we've got some recommendations that we usually give to the governments and we build into our own products. One of the big factors, I think, is avoiding any kind of exposure or use of the original biometric images, right? There's technologies to work with biometric templates are pretty well known in the industry. It's also great from a data perspective because a little string of numbers is way better than dealing with a 1 megabyte image for everybody. So the one thing we see this helping the privacy side in the future is trying to push the collection of biometric information in particular, but also document information or any other necessary information onto a device that the traveler controls, probably a mobile phone. That seems to be the platform where everybody is going, and it makes a lot of sense. So if the client or the traveler has this information on their phone, they can choose to opt in and to opt out of the process. And this is a perfect point for them to understand what information they're sharing, why they're sharing it, and to give them that choice of opting in and opting out. Now, of course, if a traveler opts out of this based on the government's policy, they may go through a different process than a traveler that chooses to opt in. And this is also going to affect those that don't have smartphones and things like that. But we figure that by getting, say, the 80% of travelers that have the technology and the willingness to participate in this process into a much faster process, then it will actually improve the lives of the people who don't as well. There will be much less of them to process. And so we think there's a lot of things to be done by moving this information collection to the mobile device.
Fantastic. That makes perfect sense. And it sounds like there's a lot of developments happening in that space, because we've heard for a couple of years now about this idea from the industry of moving the biometric enrollment process away from the airport and empowering passengers with their own devices. So very interesting to hear that that's the direction you're taking.
Mm-hmm. And we've already seen this in examples. For the U.S., they have the mobile passport program, which I've used myself, and it's very effective. And that is the level of, it gives you a feeling of participation in the process, and that it's more about safety than surveillance. And I think that is the critical aspect for something like this.
Absolutely, completely agree. That's a very important message to get across. And when people think about the end-to-end air travel experience, they often mention things like their check-in experience, retail, dining, the boarding process. A lot of people focus on the in-flight experience as well. But I think it's fair to say the immigration process is often seen as almost its own silo. And for years before biometrics came along and was used widely, passengers came to expect quite long queues. And I think it's fair to say as well that passengers just want to get the immigration process out of the way as quickly as they can so they can carry on with their journey. But in light of everything that's happened with COVID-19 and the impact that it's had on the entire industry, do you think, Nate, that the whole industry needs to try to work out a new approach to immigration, especially when you think of things like border closures, air corridors and travel bubbles, for instance, which could be around for quite some time?
Well, definitely, Ryan. I think full agreement that travel is becoming much, much more dynamic. The rules change all the time. Who's allowed to travel, who's not, what the conditions of that travel are. And so at best, it's confusing and inconvenient and can cause stress to the traveler, but it could potentially be a very severe impact on somebody who is in the middle of a trip when the rules change on them. So this new level of dynamism is something that we absolutely have to deal with in the new world. So immigration is a huge part of this end-to-end ecosystem. So immigration has two really big roles to play in the end-to-end experience. It's the setter of rules, right? Who's allowed to come and who's not allowed to come, and what are the conditions of that process. And it's also a verifier of identity. When you are in the immigration process, it's one of the best touch points to where you have a living, breathing person in front of a living, breathing authority, and all of the information is there necessary to truly link that identity to the records. But the problem with immigration is it's siloed, right? So by country, of course, because immigration information is national security information to the countries. But even within a government, ministries are siloed. The Department of the Interior Ministry and the Health Ministry and the Security Ministries don't necessarily like to share, or they don't have the means to do that. So that is a challenge that we see. So any new immigration process, I think, is going to be enabled by technologies that allow countries, operators, airlines, security officials, pretty much everybody in that end-to-end experience to share information securely and to trust it, right? And can you imagine if we can, globally maintain this set of travel rules and a set of identities for travelers globally that can be shared in real time safely? The opportunities for innovation on top of that is immense. And we can come up with entire new categories of product. We can come up with entirely new markets, and we can take the work we're doing for one particular client and share that with everybody. And I think that has to have everybody on board, between the governments, the operators, the airlines, and the travelers, to make that happen.
Absolutely. And while I was doing my research for this interview today, I was really interested to read, Nate, about the work Securiport's been doing on an epidemic control system too. And I understand this is something that you've actually been working on for a number of years, dating right back to the Ebola crisis in West Africa back in 2014. So perhaps you can tell us a little bit more about that work too.
Sure. So when that Ebola outbreak hit West Africa in 2014, we had multiple operations on the ground in the affected countries. So we thought it was our corporate duty and civic duty to respond, both to help our government partners and to keep our employees safe. We have, with people on the ground in every country, we want to make sure that everybody is protected from this outbreak. So the good part is, because our systems were already processing traveler data, we already were collecting this, or the government was already collecting this, and we helped build them the means to extract the critical information from the system that could go into their health ministry, that could go into other places, so they could do contact tracing, so they could know who was coming, who was going, who was in, who was out, and that was very valuable to them. We also took it upon ourselves to do things like provide them new hardware, such as mobile infrared cameras, to help them detect people that were at risk in transit. So, we take our partnerships with our governments very seriously, and we feel we have a responsibility to them to help out in times of crisis. And so the working in that Ebola crisis kind of gave us the seed to really build this epidemic control system into a full offering.
And my next question, you can probably guess, is around COVID-19 and how this might now help the industry in the ongoing battle against COVID, and perhaps any other pandemics that happen in the future, because I guess there must be so many lessons that you've learned over the last 6 years working on that system that can be applied now to various different epidemics that happen across the world.
Yes, Ryan. I mean, we've been evolving the capabilities of the epidemic control system in the years since Ebola. So it was really built to support any type of epidemic, MERS and SARS being probably the ones that were biggest during that interim time period. So there's really not much COVID specific about it, but it's the same needs for any type of health risk. So just like we provide the tools to do security-oriented risk analysis, our clients are using these same capabilities to screen for health risks. And they're doing this at multiple points in the travel system. So from the advanced passenger information coming in, from pre-registration, we've given the travelers the ability to register their trip to the country, to answer questionnaires about their health status. We can potentially detect somebody who might be a risk before they've even boarded the plane. So from the air of transport industry's perspective, what we're doing here is giving a system that helps to speed up that end-to-end process that can also identify the potential risks. And when you identify one of these risks, you can potentially, say on a departure, you can tell the flight that there is a person of potential risk. They can be handled separately or perhaps not permitted to board. So we think that this system is very, very useful, not just to the client governments, but to that whole end-to-end process as well. The earlier and the more often we can detect a potential risk, the more opportunities we have to mitigate it and the safer the travelers are. Now, one thing we have to be very careful about in this entire process is giving the government the ways to keep their health data separate from their security data and protected based on the policies. Often they're very different. The health ministry will have one set of regulations. The Ministry of the Interior or Security will have a different set of regulations. So, it's true across all our systems that Securiport never gets or keeps any data. This is all completely in the government's hands, but we have to give them those capabilities to segregate and protect it when they're doing this kind of mixed mode processing.
Understood. And before we wrap things up, Nate, I'm keen to get your thoughts on the entire industry and the outlook for what lies ahead, because it goes without saying that the commercial air transport industry is currently facing what is probably the biggest crisis in its history. But passenger traffic will eventually return, and the industry will recover. But I'm keen to get your thoughts on what extent you expect to see a very different air transport industry compared to the one that existed before COVID happened.
Definitely. So we were taken on a tour of an airport recently here in DC, and we saw all the mitigation strategies that have been going into place, the cleaning procedures, the separations, the changes to layouts of lounges, everything. So these are examples of changes that are happening, but they're incremental, right? They're necessary, but they're not really disruptive yet. The big disruptions from what we've seen, though, were already happening. Every time we went to an FTE event, we saw the companies that were doing this innovation in the end-to-end travel experience. The COVID situation really just accelerates that change. It forces the industry's hands into rapidly building a seamless, largely touchless, biometrics-driven process. And given the pace of COVID and everything, we probably have 1 to 2 years to really get there at the most. Faster is better, I think. So to make this happen, there's going to be a new openness that's required. The technology providers, the operators, the governments, the airlines are going to have to be, they're going to have to find a way to securely share critical information to make this happen. And nobody can really do this on their own. Anybody who tries to remain in a silo or chooses to remain there is going to end up behind the curve of this innovation. But there's that aspect, the innovation aspect, but something else that we really have to assess as an industry is I think the reasons people travel are going to change. So Ryan, I mean, we've all seen how we can conduct business virtually. We're doing it right now. So that changes the entire business travel industry for us on the other side of this. Those who do travel for business are going to expect a premium experience. It's going to be much less necessary and a much more considered investment. If I'm going to send somebody to Indonesia for a week, I'm going to want to make sure that it's really worth doing and we can't do it over Zoom or something. So, but what you can't do remotely is family visits or tourism. So there's going to be a ton of pent-up demand for that. And the thing is, people are really acutely aware of health risks now. And I think the general traveler population is going to want to see observable changes in the entire process, from buying the ticket all the way through getting on the aircraft and so on, that increase their sense of safety. So I think in summary, the new travel behavior, a global increase in the risk awareness, and then the privacy expectations. People are much more aware of privacy and data now than they were 10 years ago. This is what's going to determine the shape of the industry in the post-COVID world.
Thanks, Nate. And I think that's a great overview and some really interesting foresight to end our interview on. And I couldn't agree more in terms of openness and how important it is that industry stakeholders are more open than ever before, and how everybody is more willing to collaborate, because the position the industry finds itself in now, I completely agree, this can only be overcome if everybody is willing to work together towards the greater good, rather than just seeing themselves as a silo. So, Nate, I'd like to thank you for taking part in today's interview and for joining me for this. It's been really interesting to hear more about Securiport, and especially how you can support the industry in the immediate term, and also in the longer term, as we all work towards that more seamless, secure, touchless travel experience that we seem to be moving towards. So thank you so much for your time today.
Ryan, thank you for having me. It was a privilege, and I really enjoyed our time together. Thank you.